They thought she was just another lonely, aging widow they could easily push into a corner. They thought her silence meant compliance. But when my daughter-in-law showed up at my doorstep with a smirking notary and a briefcase full of asset transfer papers, she had absolutely no idea that I had spent the last 3 months building an ironclad trap of my own. They came to strip away my dignity and steal my home, completely blind to the multi-million-dollar secret my late husband had left in my name. This is a story about the quiet power of a mother pushed too far, and the absolute destruction of the vultures who tried to feast on her life. Welcome back to our channel, family. We are so incredibly glad to have you here today for this deeply moving, suspenseful short film. Today's story touches on a reality that far too many parents face: the delicate line between family loyalty and ultimate betrayal. If you believe that our elders deserve absolute respect, boundaries, and protection, please take a brief moment to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and turn on your notifications. Now sit back, get comfortable, and let's dive deep into today's incredible journey. The rot in my family didn't start the day the paperwork was slid across my table. It began exactly 90 days earlier, on a warm Tuesday afternoon that should have been filled with nothing but celebration. I was in my kitchen, flour dusting my forearms, kneading a heavy loaf of artisan sourdough. The rhythmic thumping of my palms against the counter was a comfort I had relied on since my husband, Arthur, passed away. That was when my only son Matthew, my absolute pride and joy, walked through the door. "Mom, you need to stop working so hard," Matthew said, his handsome face lighting up with a smile that usually melted away any worry I had. "But listen, you need to get ready. I'm bringing Brooke over for dinner tonight. I want you to finally get to know the woman I'm going to marry." My heart soared. I wiped my hands on my vintage checkered apron and beamed. "Oh, Matthew, my boy has finally found his partner." I had heard snippets about Brooke over the previous few months. She was 32, an ambitious corporate consultant, meticulously groomed and highly educated. To a simple mother like me, she sounded like the perfect match for my son. Desperate to make her feel loved, I practically flew to the high-end market downtown. I spent money I shouldn't have, buying jumbo tiger prawns, perfectly ripe Hass avocados, heavy creams, fresh vanilla beans, and a premium cut of roast beef. I stayed up until 3 in the morning cooking a feast. My ankles were swollen, and my lower back throbbed, but I kept picturing a beautiful, warm family dinner. I prepared a velvety seafood chowder, a crisp avocado salad with citrus glaze, slow-roasted beef with rosemary potatoes, and a lattice-topped cinnamon apple pie from a recipe passed down through 4 generations of my family. When evening arrived, I wore my favorite pastel pink lace dress, styled my silver hair into soft curls, and put on a touch of rose lipstick. When the doorbell rang, my heart skipped a beat with excitement. I threw the door open, my arms wide for a warm maternal embrace. "Brooke, it is an absolute privilege to..." My words died in my throat. Brooke didn't step into the embrace. Instead, she extended 2 stiff fingers, barely brushing my shoulder as if she were worried my modesty might contaminate her designer outfit. "Good evening, Miss Suzanne," she said, her voice dropping into a chilly, formal register. She didn't look at my face. Her eyes immediately scanned the small foyer, tracking the slightly worn edges of my Persian rug. She wore a sharp emerald green silk dress, and her Louboutin heels clicked against my hardwood floors like a sequence of tiny, aggressive hammers. Dinner was an exercise in emotional torture. Every attempt I made to discover her passions, her career goals, or her dreams with Matthew was met with cold, monosyllabic walls. "Do you enjoy the Pacific Northwest, Brooke?" I asked, offering her the seafood chowder. "It's adequate," she replied, barely touching the spoon to her lips. I noticed her poking at the roast beef with her fork, separating the herbs as if she were inspecting a crime scene rather than a home-cooked meal. Her flawless, blood-red acrylic nails stood out aggressively against my simple, hand-painted ceramic plates. Hoping to bridge the gap, I smiled. "Do you enjoy cooking at home, dear? I'd love to pass down Matthew's favorite recipes to you." Brooke let out a short, humorless chuckle, looking directly at Matthew before fixing her gaze on me. "I don't waste my billable hours in a kitchen, Suzanne. We prefer dining at proper establishments or utilizing high-end catering." Home cooking is a bit heavy for my lifestyle. The word proper felt like a jagged piece of glass piercing my chest. Matthew cleared his throat, looking intensely uncomfortable, and quickly shifted the conversation to local sports. But the damage was done. In Brooke's eyes, my food wasn't proper. My home wasn't proper. And by extension, I was a relic of an inferior past. Over the next few weeks, the exclusion intensified into a systematic campaign. During family visits, Brooke would sit on the absolute edge of my sofa, scrolling through her phone, treating my presence like a mandatory chore. Then came the true warning sign. One afternoon, while I was brewing espresso, she cornered me in the kitchen. "You know, Suzanne, once the wedding is finalized, you'll finally have all the time in the world to focus on yourself," she whispered, her voice laced with a synthetic sweetness. "You won't need to worry about hosting or being involved in Matthew's daily schedules anymore." It wasn't an offer of peace. It was an eviction notice from my son's life. The wedding preparations became a living nightmare. Brooke locked me out of every single planning committee. When I traditionally offered to bake the multi-tiered wedding cake, a custom that our family had honored for nearly 80 years, Brooke laughed openly in front of the wedding planner. "Oh, absolute nonsense, Suzanne. We are having a black tie gala. We can't have something homemade sitting on the display table. Let's leave it to the licensed professionals." That night, I collapsed into my kitchen chair and wept until my eyes were raw, clutching the apron my late mother had gifted me. To Brooke, decades of maternal love and family tradition were reduced to a single derogatory word: homemade. Suzanne swallowed her pride, believing that the wedding day would finally bring peace. But she had no idea that her daughter-in-law had already engineered a public humiliation so devastating it would completely shatter Suzanne's heart and force her to uncover a secret legal weapon that would change the balance of power forever. What did Brooke do at the ceremony? Keep watching, because the real retaliation is about to unfold. The wedding day arrived like a dark, gathering storm. Determined to hold my head high, I woke up at 4 a.m. I had purchased an elegant plum-colored formal gown for the occasion. I visited my longtime stylist, Carol, who gave me an elegant upswept hairstyle that made me look vibrant and radiant. "You look absolutely stunning, Suzanne," Carol cheered, adjusting the final pin. "Matthew is going to be so incredibly proud walking down the aisle with you." Her words gave me a fragile glimmer of hope. I arrived at the cathedral a full hour early, wanting to ensure everything was immaculate. As guests poured in, I greeted our extended family with a genuine smile. But when the ushers began seating the immediate family, the knife was driven deep into my back. Brooke had personally drafted the seating chart. I was bypassed completely for the front pews. Instead, I was guided down the aisle to the 5th row, squeezed tightly between Brooke's distant corporate colleagues and neighbors who barely knew my son. The mother of the groom was relegated to the back like an unwanted stranger. From my distant seat, I had to strain my neck just to see my own boy exchange vows. The mothers of Brooke's bridesmaids, women who had never spent a single feverish night comforting my son, occupied the seats of honor. I swallowed the lump of humiliation in my throat, blinking back tears as the rings were exchanged. Something fundamental inside my maternal spirit cracked in that chapel. At the grand reception, the alienation turned cruel. Brooke introduced me to high society guests not as Matthew's mother, but merely as Matthew's aging parent. She would casually add, "She does a bit of cooking in her spare time," effectively reducing my entire 30-year identity as a dedicated mother to a menial domestic function. When the time came for the ceremonial toasts, I adjusted my notes. I had written a beautiful, heartfelt blessing for my son, but Brooke controlled the microphone like a military dictator. She called upon her parents, her siblings, her college sorority sisters, and even her firm's managing partner. When an old family friend loudly shouted, "What about a speech from Matthew's mother?" Brooke turned her gaze toward my table, her eyes flashing with ice. "Oh," Brooke sighed into the microphone, her voice echoing through the ballroom. "I suppose Miss Suzanne can give us a very brief 2-sentence greeting. Keep it short, please, we are on a strict timeline." My legs shook violently as I stepped up to the microphone, hundreds of eyes boring into me. "I want to thank the Almighty for bringing us together on this sacred day. Before I could even initiate my second sentence, Brooke began clapping loudly, signaling the DJ to raise the transition music. The room followed her lead, and my maternal blessing was completely drowned out by a wave of forced, awkward applause. I was cut off and discarded in front of everyone I loved. During the dinner service, I was placed at a rear corner table next to the speaker systems, seated with distant cousins who completely ignored me. I watched my son laugh, drink champagne, and dance the night away, completely absorbed into Brooke's elite world. When the mother-son dance was announced, Matthew danced with Brooke's mother, and then with her aunts. He never once looked toward my corner. At 11 p.m., unable to endure the mockery any longer, I walked up to Matthew to say goodbye. I tapped his tuxedo sleeve. "Son, I'm going to drive home now. I'm quite exhausted." He gave me a rapid, distracted hug, his eyes already drifting back to the main bar. "Thanks for showing up, Mom. Love you." Brooke stepped up beside him like a cold shadow. "Drive safely, Suzanne. So glad you could make the trip out." Her tone didn't convey gratitude. It sounded like a final valediction. As I walked out into the chilly parking lot, I happened to walk past a group of Brooke's bridesmaids smoking near the hedges. Brooke's sharp voice carried over the gravel. "Thank goodness she lives completely across town," Brooke laughed to her friends. "She's harmless really, but you know how these older working-class mothers are. They always try to cling to their sons and interfere with modern households. I've already managed to establish the boundary." The cruel giggles of her friends chased me all the way to my old sedan. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands trembling violently against the steering wheel, tears blurring the highway lines all the way back to my house. The next 48 hours brought nothing but a deafening silence. No text from Matthew, no follow-up call. A full week after the wedding, I swallowed my pride and called him. "Hi Matthew, honey. How was the honeymoon destination?" I asked, forcing a cheerful tone. His response was detached and hurried. "It was fine, Mom. Look, Brooke sends her regards, but we are absolutely swamped right now. We are currently auditing the house paperwork and dealing with real estate logistics. I'll call you in a few weeks." The house. Not our house. Not my house. Just an abstract piece of property. The very next morning I decided to bake a fresh batch of chocolate walnut cookies, Matthew's absolute childhood favorite, as a peace offering to visit their new residence in Bellevue. When I pulled up to the gated estate and rang the bell, Brooke opened the door wearing an expensive silk loungewear robe. "Oh, Suzanne, what an unscheduled surprise," she said, blocking the doorway completely. "I brought some fresh cookies for Matthew," I said softly, holding up the ribbon-tied basket. Brooke snatched the basket from my hands without offering an invitation inside. "Matthew is currently in a high-stakes virtual corporate conference. I'll ensure he gets these. Have a pleasant drive back, Suzanne." The heavy mahogany door slammed firmly in my face. I stood on the pristine porch, feeling like a disgraced panhandler. It was in that exact moment of absolute rejection that the memory of my late husband, Arthur, rushed back to me. Before Arthur passed away from illness 5 years prior, he had grabbed my hand in the hospital room and whispered, "Suzanne, listen to me carefully. A storm will come when I'm gone. Do not let anyone run over you. You are far more powerful than you realize, and I have made sure you will never have to beg for a single scrap of respect." The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since his funeral. I walked into my master closet, moved the floorboards, and pulled out Arthur's heavy iron lockbox. I input the combination and sorted through the standard documents, wills, life insurance, marriage certificates. And then at the absolute bottom, I pulled out a thick, wax-sealed manila envelope that I had completely overlooked. It was a pristine legal deed for an expansive property in eastern Washington. My breath caught in my throat as I read the updated legal appraisal. Arthur had secretly inherited a massive 500-acre fully operational cattle ranch and agricultural estate from his late uncle. Because of a strict, ironclad clause in his family lineage, the entire asset bypassed standard probate and belonged solely and exclusively to me, Suzanne. The modern valuation of the land, the water rights, the cattle inventory, and the timber assets was astronomical, worth tens of millions of dollars. The revenue from the ranch operations alone was generating a massive passive income that had been accumulating in a private, locked trust account. I sat on the floor holding the golden seal of the deed, a slow, powerful smile spreading across my face. I wasn't a poor, helpless widow dependent on a corporate daughter-in-law's mercy. I was one of the largest private landholders in the county. I made an immediate vow. I would keep this asset completely hidden. Not a word to Matthew. Not a whisper to Brooke. This would be my ultimate shield. Armed with a multi-million-dollar secret, Suzanne watched as Brooke and Matthew began circling her modest home like ravenous sharks. They were about to launch a psychological campaign to force her into a high-security nursing home and seize her bank accounts. But they had no idea they were walking straight into a legal minefield. What happened when Matthew tried to force his mother's hand? Stay tuned because the trap is about to spring shut. Within 48 hours of discovering the deed, the predatory phone calls began. Brooke started calling me multiple times a day, her voice dripping with a terrifying synthetic warmth. "Suzanne, darling," she would purr over the line. "Matthew and I have been reviewing your living conditions. That old house of yours must be such an exhausting physical burden. Have you considered liquidating the property and moving into a simplified, luxury apartment? We can easily manage the proceeds for you to maximize the returns." "I am perfectly content in my home, Brooke," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly calm and level. "This is where my memories live." "Memories won't fix a leaking roof, Suzanne. Just think about it," she snapped, her tone sharpening before she hung up. 2 days later, Matthew arrived at my house unannounced. It was the first time he had visited his childhood home alone since the wedding. He didn't hug me. He sat on the edge of the living room sofa, fidgeting nervously with his luxury car keys, avoiding my eyes completely. "Mom, look. Brooke and I are deeply concerned about your mental clarity and physical safety," Matthew began, his voice sounding entirely rehearsed, as if he were reading a corporate script. "This neighborhood is changing. The house is too vast for an aging widow. Brooke has connected with a premier luxury senior living consultant." "A senior living consultant, Matthew?" I asked, my voice remaining completely soft, playing the role of the fragile grandmother perfectly. "Yes, Mom. It's a specialized, secure assisted living facility. They have 24-hour medical supervision, structured dining, and memory care. We think the best financial move is to sign the house over to our family trust, let us sell it, and invest the capital into a high-yield fund under our joint corporate names. It completely protects you from financial fraud." The sheer audacity of his words pierced my heart. My own flesh and blood, the boy I had raised on single meals and late-night prayers, was sitting in my living room trying to gaslight me into surrendering my home so his wife could control the liquidation cash. "And what if I refused to leave my home, son?" I asked quietly. Matthew's face hardened, a flash of Brooke's aggressive corporate training showing through his features. "Mom, be realistic. If you become stubborn, we might have to involve state evaluation services to assess your cognitive capabilities. We are just trying to do what is best for you before you make a costly mistake." It was a direct threat. They were prepared to legally declare me incompetent to seize my assets. The moment Matthew walked out the door, I picked up my phone and called Rachel, my closest friend of 45 years. Rachel's husband, Anthony, was a retired union representative, and they were the only people I could trust completely. "Rachel, it's happening," I said, my voice steady but intense. "They are moving to take the house and lock me away." "Not on my watch, Suzanne," Rachel barked over the phone. "Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., Anthony and I are picking you up. We are taking you straight to downtown Seattle to meet Robert Hayes. He's the most fierce elder asset protection attorney in the state. Do not sign a single piece of scrap paper tonight." The next morning, we walked into the sleek corporate office of Mr. Robert Hayes. He was a distinguished, sharp-eyed attorney with decades of experience dismantling family estate scams. I laid out my standard house documents, the predatory timeline, and finally the pristine 500-acre ranch deed. Mr. Hayes adjusted his glasses, his eyes widening as he reviewed the ranch documentation. "Miss Suzanne, this ranch asset is an absolute fortress. And the behavior you are describing from your daughter-in-law is a textbook psychological coercion pattern. They isolate the elder parent, manufacture a false narrative of cognitive decline, present a forced solution, and seize the signature before independent counsel can intervene. What do we do, Mr. Hayes? I asked. A fierce, brilliant smile spread across the attorney's face. We do not run, Ms. Suzanne. We build a trap. First, we will quietly establish an unalterable, private, irrevocable trust that moves your home and the ranch completely out of reach. Second, we will draft a legal counter-strategy. The very next time they show up with paperwork, you will invite them in. And I will ensure the authorities are watching. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown. Brooke, Matthew, and their crooked notary were about to arrive at Suzanne's house, confident they were going to strip her of everything. They had no idea that a hidden camera, an elder fraud investigator, and a multi-million-dollar surprise were waiting for them in the living room. Keep watching, because you do not want to miss the exact moment the smug smiles are wiped off their faces. On Saturday afternoon, exactly at 2 p.m., a luxury SUV pulled into my driveway. I stood by the window, adjusting a hidden digital voice recorder that Rachel had tucked into my apron pocket. Brooke stepped out, her face radiant with a triumphant, predatory smugness. Beside her was Matthew, looking pale and conflicted, followed by a thin, slick-looking man carrying a heavy leather briefcase. This was Paul, the notary Brooke had bought and paid for to expedite the paperwork. I opened the door, deliberately letting my shoulders slump, projecting the image of a defeated, broken old woman. Come in, everyone, I whispered softly. Oh, Suzanne, you look so wonderfully cooperative today. Brooke beamed, stepping into the living room and immediately occupying my late husband's favorite armchair. She signaled Paul, who opened his briefcase and laid out 3 thick stacks of legal documents across my coffee table. Miss Suzanne, Paul the notary said, offering an oily professional smile. To simplify your life, we have drafted a comprehensive property quitclaim deed, an immediate asset liquidation transfer, and an irrevocable power of attorney that grants Brooke and Matthew total governance over your financial and medical decisions if you display any signs of exhaustion. And the assisted living home? I asked, my voice trembling with practiced fragility. Brooke slid a glossy brochure across the table. We've reserved a lovely high-security suite for you, Suzanne. It's beautiful. You'll have a lovely window view. You just need to sign right here, here, and here. Let's get this resolved before the weekend ends. She slid a heavy gold-plated pen across the table. It felt like a loaded weapon aimed directly at my life. I picked up the pen, my hand shaking deliberately. And if I sign this, I can never change my mind? I can never come back to my home. It's for your own protection, Mom, Matthew muttered, looking down at the carpet, unable to meet my eyes. Bad actors out there could scam you. This locks everything down safely with us. Yes, I said, lifting my head high, my voice suddenly losing all of its shaking fragility and turning into a razor-sharp, booming register. It certainly does lock things down. Which is exactly why I invited a few secondary witnesses to review these proper documents. Brooke blinked, her smug smile faltering. What are you talking about? Right on cue, the side door to my dining room swung open. Mr. Robert Hayes stepped into the living room, flanked by an investigator from the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, holding a high-definition recording camera. Rachel and her husband, Anthony, stepped in right behind them, blocking the main exit. Paul the notary froze, his face turning an ash-gray color within seconds. What is the meaning of this? Brooke shrieked, springing up from the armchair. Who are you people? Matthew, get these intruders out of our house. Sit down, young lady, Mr. Hayes commanded, his voice carrying the immense weight of federal authority. My name is Robert Hayes, independent legal counsel for Ms. Suzanne. And this is Investigator Daniel Harris from the Elder Fraud and Economic Crimes Division. Investigator Harris lifted his badge and focused the camera directly on the paperwork spread across the table. This session is currently being recorded as official evidence in an active investigation into real estate coercion and grand larceny asset exploitation. Matthew stepped back, his face completely drained of color. Mom, What is this? What did you do? I protected myself from the vultures I raised, I said coldly. Paul the notary frantically grabbed his briefcase, attempting to slide toward the hallway. I was merely brought in to provide basic notary validation. I have no knowledge of the family dynamics. I'm leaving. Anthony stepped firmly into his path, his broad shoulders completely sealing the exit. You aren't going anywhere, buddy. Sit back down. Mr. Hayes pulled a thick, authenticated folder from his own bag and slammed it onto the coffee table right on top of Brooke's fraudulent contracts. Let's discuss real assets, shall we? Mr. Hayes announced loudly. Brooke, you have spent 3 months attempting to illicitly liquidate this modest, $400,000 residential home. In doing so, you have exposed your criminal intent to an active fraud investigator. But what you failed to realize due to your staggering arrogance is that Miss Suzanne is the sole owner of the historic 500-acre Washington Valley Ranch, valued at an appraised market minimum of $42 million. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the distant ticking of the kitchen clock. Brooke's mouth fell open, her eyes darting between the certified ranch deed and my face. $42 million? A ranch? Matthew, did you know about this? Matthew looked completely bewildered, staring at the documents like they were written in an alien language. No. Dad never told me. Your father left it exclusively to me because he knew your character was weak, Matthew, I said, looking directly into my son's trembling eyes. He knew that the moment a shiny, greedy distraction came into your life, you would be willing to discard your own mother to please her. You worried about my poverty, my incompetence, and my aging mind. But the reality is, I could buy and sell your entire corporate firm 10 times over before breakfast. Brooke took a deep, desperate breath, her predatory nature instantly trying to pivot into survival mode. She dropped to her knees right in front of my chair, her face contorting into a forced, weeping mask. Oh, Suzanne. Please, it was an absolute misunderstanding. We didn't know you had this kind of responsibility. We were just so stressed about your safety. We can manage the ranch together as a family. Let me help you run the estate administration. I looked down at her glossy red nails, her fake tears, and her transparent greed. I stood up, completely radiating the dignity and power I had reclaimed. Get out of my sight, I said. Suzanne's ultimate stand didn't just save her home. It triggered an absolute collapse of Brooke's house of cards. The criminal consequences were immediate. The marriage was shattered, and Suzanne transformed her massive inheritance into a movement that swept across the entire country. Stay tuned for the final chapter to see the beautiful poetic justice that befell the scammers, and how Suzanne found her true purpose at 70 years old. The fallout from that afternoon was swift and absolute. Paul, the crooked notary, had his license permanently revoked within a month. Investigator Harris utilized our hidden audio recordings and the on-camera confrontation to uncover a massive local network where Paul had been assisting predatory relatives in transferring properties away from isolated elders. He is currently serving an extended sentence in state prison. Brooke tried to launch a desperate legal countersuit during her divorce proceedings with Matthew, attempting to claim a percentage of the hidden ranch estate. But Mr. Hayes had built an impenetrable wall around my assets. Because the ranch was a direct, lineage-protected inheritance held in an unalterable trust, she didn't receive a single penny. Realizing she had exposed her true criminal nature and completely ruined her social standing, she quietly packed her bags and fled the state, likely hunting for her next unsuspecting target. Matthew was left with the absolute ruin of his choices. He visits the ranch every single Sunday afternoon, completely alone. He sits on the porch looking out over the 500 acres of thriving land, trying to rebuild the maternal bridge he eagerly helped burn down. Our conversations are long, quiet, and filled with heavy, tearful apologies from his side. I have offered him my maternal forgiveness because I refuse to carry bitterness in my soul, but I have withheld my trust. Trust is an asset that cannot be granted through a single apology. It must be earned through a lifetime of consistent, respectful action. As for me, I celebrated my 70th birthday right here on the grand wraparound porch of the ranch house, Surrounded by my true family, Rachel, Anthony, and Mr. Hayes, we transformed the massive main house of the ranch into the Arthur and Suzanne Foundation for Elder Autonomy. We utilized the immense passive revenue from the cattle and timber operations to build a fully funded, free legal and physical sanctuary for aging women who are facing psychological coercion, financial exploitation, or family abandonment. Every single week, women from all over the country arrive at our gates with small suitcases and heavy hearts. They sit in my kitchen, they drink warm chamomile tea from my ceramic cups, and they receive elite, free legal protection to fight back against the vultures in their own families. I used to think that turning 70 meant the fading of the light. I used to believe that silence was my only shield to keep the peace. But I was completely wrong. Silence is gold, but standing up and roaring for your boundaries is a diamond. My name is Suzanne. I am 70 years old, and this is my absolute declaration of independence. Self-respect has no expiration date, and your voice is a weapon that can never be taken away unless you willingly surrender it. Remember who you are. Keep your guard up, and never let anyone make you feel invisible. What an incredible journey of justice and self-respect. Suzanne's story reminds us that family should be a safe haven. But when boundaries are crossed, we must find the strength to stand firm. Now we want to hear from you, our incredible community. What do you honestly think about Suzanne's choice to keep her millions hidden until the absolute last second? If you found yourself in her exact position, with your own children trying to force you into an assisted living center to control your property, what concrete steps would you take? What do healthy, respectful family boundaries look like to you when caring for our aging parents? Please drop your thoughts, your personal experiences, and your wisdom in the comment section down below. Your words might give life-changing strength to someone who is secretly going through this exact same nightmare today. Before you leave, don't forget to give this video a massive thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone you love. Thank you for watching, learning, and growing with us. We will see you in our next story.